No one respected the apes from Earth. So when the Empress of a trillion souls picked a human as her personal shield, the galaxy laughed. They called him a walking punchline. But when the blood started flowing, the universe learned a terrifying truth. Humans don't fight to win. They fight to survive. In the grand hierarchy of the cosmos, humanity was a joke. We had stumbled into the intergalactic community barely a century ago, coughing through the smog of our rudimentary fission drives, offering little more than agricultural exports and cheap squishy labor. We weren't biologically immortal like the crystalline Valyrians, nor did we possess the towering armored bulk of the Corvathi. We were just apes who had figured out how to split the atom and launch ourselves into the dark. Jude Caldwell knew exactly where he stood on the galactic food chain. Standing at 6 feet 2 inches and weighing 210 pounds, Jude was a big man back in Chicago. Here on the capital world of Crimea, he was functionally a toddler. Jude was a former Earth Coalition Marine. He had seen brutal combat in the resource skirmishes of the outer asteroid belts, fighting under a commander named Jack Reynolds, who taught him that survival was rarely about who had the biggest gun. It was about who was willing to get the dirtiest. Now, Jude was just another private military contractor working for Aegis Solutions, taking high-risk security details to send credits back to his ex-wife and his 12-year-old daughter, Chloe, on Earth. He was supposed to be guarding a minor trade delegation at the Obsidian Palace. He was not supposed to be standing in the grand courtyard of the Corvathi Empire, lined up alongside 24 of the deadliest mercenaries in the known universe, waiting for the Empress to select her new personal vanguard. Empress Varelia was a vision of alien regality. 7 feet tall, with pale iridescent skin that shimmered like crushed pearls and an intricate crown of keratin horns sweeping back from her brow, she ruled an empire that spanned 3,000 star systems. Her court, however, was a viper's nest. Her military council, led by Lord Commander Oren, a hulking scarred veteran with scales the color of dried blood, was trying to box her in. Oren had arranged this selection ceremony to surround the Empress with his own loyalists. He had paraded out the finest warriors from a dozen warrior castes. And then there was Jude, who had been shoved into the lineup by a bureaucratic error in the palace's security contracting office. Oren sneered, gesturing to a massive, horned brute from the outer rim. "Your Radiance, I present Corvathi of the Blood Wastes. He has slain 40 beasts in the arena. He will ensure your absolute safety." Varelia's golden eyes swept over the line of towering monstrous killers. She looked bored. Then her gaze stopped on Jude. He was standing at parade rest, wearing standard-issue composite armor that looked like cardboard compared to the energy-shielded suits of the others. "What is that?" the Empress asked, her voice a melodic, echoing hum that translated through Jude's earpiece. "A human, your Radiance," Oren scoffed, clearly embarrassed. "A clerical error. They are a fragile species, prone to disease, easily crushed, and lacking any natural weaponry. I will have him removed." Varelia's lips curled into a subtle, mischievous smile. She saw exactly what Oren was doing. The Lord Commander wanted to isolate her to make her dependent on his chosen gladiators. She needed to send a message. She needed to humiliate him publicly. "No," Varelia said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard. "I choose him." A collective gasp echoed from the gathered nobility. Oren's jaw tightened. "Your Radiance. Surely this is a jest. That creature cannot protect you. It is a walking punchline. A stiff breeze would break its spine." "Then it is a good thing I rule a civilized empire and not a wind tunnel, Lord Commander," Varelia replied coolly. She walked up to Jude, towering over him, peering down into his brown eyes. "What is your designation, ape?" "Jude Caldwell, ma'am," he replied, keeping his voice deadpan. "Jude Caldwell." She tested the syllables. "Congratulations. You are now the shield of the Empress. Do try not to die from exhaustion while walking up the palace stairs." The court erupted in stifled laughter. It was the ultimate insult to the military caste. The Empress had chosen a squishy, pathetic human over the finest warriors of the Corvathi. It was a political joke, a meme born in real time. Jude was handed a ceremonial staff, a decorative piece of junk, and positioned 2 steps behind the Empress. For the next 3 weeks, Jude's life was a waking nightmare of mockery. The alien press ran holovids, analyzing his fragile bone structure. The royal guards openly placed bets on how long it would take him to accidentally kill himself. Even Varelia treated him like a pet, occasionally tossing him a piece of exotic fruit and asking if his primitive digestive tract could handle it. Jude took it all in stride. He didn't care about their politics. He cared about his paycheck. His training under Jack Reynolds had drilled one absolute truth into his mind. Never let your ego compromise your situational awareness. While the alien guards relied on their overwhelming strength and automated sensor drones, Jude relied on something humans had spent 1,000,000 years perfecting on the plains of Earth: paranoia. He studied the palace blueprints. He noted the blind spots in the security grid. He watched the dignitaries, studying their micro-expressions, their gaits, the way their eyes darted toward the exits. He knew the Empress had chosen him as a joke. But Jude wasn't laughing. The Equinox Gala was the most important political event of the Corvathi decade. The Obsidian Palace was transformed into a glowing sea of bioluminescent flora and floating crystal chandeliers. Thousands of dignitaries from across the galaxy mingled in the grand ballroom, drinking liquid starlight and negotiating the fate of whole solar systems. Jude stood in his designated spot, 3 paces behind the Empress's elevated throne. He had been forced into a ceremonial uniform that felt like a tight tuxedo made of stiff leather. He looked utterly ridiculous. Below the dais, Lord Commander Oren stood with his personal guard, casting disdainful glares at the human. The air was thick with a scent of alien perfumes and roasted exotic meats. To the Empress, it was a display of absolute power and luxury. To Jude, it was a tactical nightmare. Too many people, too much noise, too many blind spots, Jude thought, his eyes scanning the crowd. Human pattern recognition is a biological miracle. We evolved to spot the hidden predator in the tall grass, to notice the one shadow that doesn't move with the wind. Jude was watching a group of serving staff, a sleek, gray-skinned species known as the Solari, hired for their elegance and obedience. Something was wrong. 4 of the servers were moving in a perfect diamond formation through the chaotic crowd. Their eyes weren't scanning the guests to offer drinks. Their eyes were fixed on the perimeter guards. Their footfalls were perfectly synchronized. They weren't waiters. They were an assault team. Jude tapped his comms earpiece. "Command, this is Caldwell. We have 4 unknowns moving in a tactical diamond toward the dais. I need a scan on the catering staff now." Laughter crackled in his ear. It was the Corvathi security captain. "Relax, little ape. The palace is wrapped in a biometric dampening field. No weapons can be brought inside. Enjoy the music." Jude's heart rate began to climb. He looked up at the massive glass dome above the ballroom. He looked at the heavy Durac steel doors. If they don't have weapons, how do they plan to do this? Then the music stopped. It wasn't a gradual fade. The sound was instantly sucked from the room, replaced by a high-pitched, agonizing whine that vibrated in Jude's teeth. It sounded like a massive piece of feedback on a concert speaker, but pitched just outside the normal range of human hearing. Below the dais, chaos erupted. But it wasn't the chaos of a panic. It was the chaos of a slaughterhouse. Every single Corvathi in the room, including Lord Commander Oren and his elite guards, suddenly seized up. They collapsed to the marble floor, their muscles locking violently, their eyes rolling back in their heads. The giant 8-foot-tall warriors hit the ground like felled trees, convulsing helplessly. The Empress gasped, clutching her throat as she slumped over the armrest of her throne, paralyzed. A neurological pulse weapon, Jude realized instantly. A frequency designed specifically to overload the complex nervous systems of the dominant alien species. A 1 billion-credit assassination tool. Jude's head throbbed. His vision blurred for a split second. But that was it. Human nervous systems were primitive, insulated, and incredibly dense. The frequency that was currently short-circuiting the brains of the galaxy's apex predators merely gave the human a mild migraine. The 4 Solari servers threw off their trays. From their sleeves, they drew long, jagged blades made of compressed plasma weapons that didn't register on standard metal detectors. They leaped onto the dais with terrifying speed, their eyes locked on the paralyzed Empress. For a fraction of a second, the universe held its breath. The assassins expected to walk up to the throne and sever the Empress's head while the rest of the room twitched on the floor. They did not expect the joke to move. Jude Caldwell didn't think. He didn't weigh the galactic political implications. He operated on pure, distilled muscle memory honed in the dirt of Earth's wars. He reached under his ridiculous ceremonial tunic and drew the one weapon he had smuggled in, a weapon the aliens considered so primitive they didn't even bother scanning for it. A high-carbon steel combat knife paired with an old-school chemically propelled, suppressed 9mm handgun. Jack Reynolds had given it to him years ago. When the batteries die and the lasers fail, Jack had said, physics still works. The lead assassin lunged at the Empress, plasma blade raised. Crack, crack. 2 hollow-point rounds took the assassin in the chest. The kinetic force of the bullets, a concept almost entirely foreign in an era of energy weapons, lifted the gray-skinned killer off his feet and threw him backward down the stairs, dead before he hit the marble. The remaining 3 assassins froze. Their large black eyes snapped toward Jude. The human was standing over the paralyzed Empress, his pistol raised, his face devoid of any emotion save cold, predatory focus. Back off, Jude growled, racking the slide of his pistol to chamber another round. The assassins hissed. They had trained to kill gods. They weren't going to be stopped by an ape. They charged. Jude kicked the Empress's massive throne, using all his leverage to tip the heavy chair backward, spilling Varelia out of the direct line of sight just as a plasma blade cleaved the air where her neck had been a millisecond before. The second assassin closed the distance, swiping at Jude. Jude ducked beneath the glowing blade, feeling the heat singe his eyebrows. He didn't try to block. He stepped into the attacker's guard. He drove his steel combat knife upward, sliding it directly beneath the alien's jaw and up into its brainstem. He ripped the blade out, spun, and fired his remaining magazine into the third assassin, dropping it in a spray of violet blood. The fourth assassin, the leader, was smart. It threw its plasma blade like a spear. Jude twisted, but he wasn't fast enough. The glowing blade grazed his left shoulder, slicing through the ceremonial leather and carving a deep, searing trench into his flesh. The smell of burning meat filled the air. Jude stumbled, grunting in pain. The assassin didn't hesitate. It leaped forward, tackling Jude to the ground, its hands wrapping around the human's throat to crush his windpipe. This was the moment the galaxy assumed humans would break. In the face of superior strength, a fragile species should surrender to shock. But humanity had a secret weapon, a biological cheat code forged in the terrifying wilds of prehistoric Earth. Adrenaline. Jude's adrenal glands dumped a massive toxic payload of epinephrine directly into his bloodstream. His pupils dilated. His heart slammed against his ribs like a sledgehammer. The pain in his shoulder simply vanished, overridden by a primal, apocalyptic rage. The assassin watched in horror as the squishy human didn't pass out. Instead, the human's eyes locked onto his, wide and feral. Jude's hands came up. He didn't try to pry the alien's fingers off his neck. Instead, Jude jammed his thumbs directly into the assassin's large, sensitive black eyes. The alien shrieked, its grip loosening. Jude bucked his hips, throwing the lighter creature off him. He scrambled to his feet, grabbed a heavy silver wine decanter from a nearby table, and brought it down on the assassin's skull with the force of a swinging baseball bat. Snorts, crunch. The ballroom was entirely silent, save for the hum of the neuropulse generator and the heavy, ragged breathing of the single human left standing. Jude wiped a mix of sweat and alien blood from his face. He looked down at his shoulder. It was bad, but the wound was cauterized by the plasma. He picked up a fresh magazine from his belt, slapped it into his pistol, and looked down at the paralyzed Empress. Varelia was staring at him, her golden eyes wide with an emotion she had never felt in her centuries of life. Absolute visceral terror. Not of the assassins, but of the blood-soaked ape standing over her. "Come on, your radiance," Jude breathed, grabbing her armored arm and hauling her massive, sluggish frame upward. We're leaving. The Obsidian Palace was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb. The neuropulse weapon had paralyzed the entire upper echelon of the Corvathi military and nobility, leaving them helpless on the ballroom floor. As Jude dragged the semi-paralyzed Empress Varelia through the service corridors, the grim reality of the situation settled in. This wasn't a fringe extremist attack. To bypass the palace's external planetary shields, disable the biometric scanners, and smuggle in a neuropulse generator required unprecedented access. This was an inside job. My legs, Varelia stammered, her voice slurring. The pulse was wearing off, but her nervous system was severely lagging. She leaned heavily on Jude, who was struggling to support her immense weight. You killed them. How? Kinetic force and bad manners, Jude grunted, checking the corners of the dimly lit hallway. Keep moving. If they sent one team, they sent a cleanup crew. We must reach the royal panic room in the West Wing, she ordered, struggling to regain her regal composure despite the violet blood smeared across her cheek. It is shielded, impenetrable. Jude shook his head. If I was running this op, the panic room is exactly where I'd want you to go. It's a fatal funnel. We're going down into the catacombs. The catacombs are a maze of heating vents and plasma conduits. It is undignified. Dignity gets you killed. Ma'am, down we go. They descended a spiraling maintenance stairwell, plunging deep into the subterranean belly of the palace. The air grew sweltering, thick with the smell of ozone and sulfur from the massive planetary geothermal taps. Jude's adrenaline was beginning to level out, and the agonizing burn in his shoulder flared to life. He gritted his teeth, tearing a strip from his ruined tunic and binding the wound tightly. Suddenly, the heavy blast doors above them hissed open. Heavy metallic footsteps echoed down the shaft. Jude pressed the Empress into an alcove and peeked upward. Descending the stairs were 6 heavily armored figures. They weren't Solari assassins. They were massive, hulking figures clad in the crimson and gold armor of the Royal Inquisition, the Empire's elite secret police. At their head was a voice Jude recognized immediately. Sweep the lower levels. The ape took her down here. I want her head, and I want the human skinned alive. It was Lord Commander Orin. Varelia's breath hitched in her throat. Orin. He was paralyzed. I saw him fall. He faked it, Jude whispered, his mind racing. He probably had neural dampeners installed in his skull just for this op. He set up the gala to wipe out the loyalists and take the throne. And he's going to blame the assassination on the Solari. He has 6 Inquisitors with him, Varelia whispered, real despair creeping into her voice. They are wearing Class 4 energy armor. Your primitive projectile weapon will not pierce it. Jude looked at his 9mm. She was right. Hollow points wouldn't even scratch Corvathi military shields. He looked at his combat knife. Useless against plasma-forged plating. He had a wounded Empress, a useless gun, and 6 walking tanks hunting them. They rely on their shields, right? Jude asked, eyeing the massive, glowing plasma conduits running along the ceiling of the catacombs. Yes, the shields deflect energy and disintegrate high-velocity impacts, she said. What about gravity? Varelia blinked. Snorts. I do not understand. Humans have a saying, Jude muttered, sliding his pistol into its holster and drawing his combat knife. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. Stay here. Jude slipped out of the alcove, moving silently into the labyrinth of massive pipes and steam vents. He was in his element now. This wasn't a pristine ballroom. This was the gritty industrial belly of a machine. It reminded him of the factory ruins of the Orion Wars. He climbed up a series of maintenance rungs, perching himself atop a massive geothermal vent pipe directly above the central thoroughfare. He waited. Below him, the 6 Inquisitors moved in a tactical wedge. Their energy shields hummed with a faint blue glow. They were relying entirely on their thermal optics, scanning for body heat. But human body heat was different. In a room sweltering at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, Jude's sweat was cooling his skin, masking his thermal signature against the blazing pipes. To their sensors, he was practically invisible. The Inquisitors walked directly beneath him. Jude didn't jump onto them. Instead, he gripped the heavy iron release valve of the superheated steam pipe he was sitting on. He waited until the rearmost Inquisitor passed beneath the valve, and he kicked the lever down with all his might. A deafening roar echoed through the catacombs as a massive jet of 400-degree pressurized steam blasted downward. Energy shields are designed to stop high-velocity bullets and lasers. They are not designed to stop ambient environmental heat and pressure. The steam bypassed the kinetic shields entirely, enveloping the two rear guards. They screamed a horrific, gurgling sound as their armored suits essentially turned into pressure cookers, boiling them alive inside their armor. The remaining 4 guards spun around in panic, firing their plasma rifles blindly into the steam cloud. Using the chaos as cover, Jude dropped behind the 3rd guard and kicked the back of its knee. The alien collapsed, its shield flickering for a split second. Jude drove his combat knife into the power pack on its waist, then dove clear as it exploded. The blast disabled the shield and locked the armored suit in place, trapping the alien inside. 3 remained. They spotted him and opened fire, plasma bolts melting the pipes behind him. Jude sprinted through a maintenance corridor, using his speed and agility to stay ahead of the towering soldiers. He drew them onto an old, rusted catwalk suspended above a deep geothermal shaft. As the 2 Vanguard Inquisitors stepped onto the catwalk, their combined weight, easily over a ton with their armor, made the metal groan. Jude stood on the solid concrete edge on the other side, breathing heavily, letting them see him. "You die here, human?" the lead Inquisitor snarled, raising his rifle. "Wrong," Jude panted. He didn't shoot at the aliens. He drew his 9mm, aimed down, and fired 3 rounds directly into the rusted, load-bearing shear pins holding the catwalk to the concrete wall. The bullets shattered the brittle, rusted metal. The catwalk gave way with a sickening screech. The 2 Inquisitors didn't even have time to scream as the floor fell out from under them. Their energy shields glowed brightly all the way down the shaft, entirely useless against a 300-foot drop into the boiling geothermal magma below. Jude holstered his gun, turning around to face the final threat. Lord Commander Orin stepped out from the shadows, his face twisted in a mask of absolute fury. He held a massive double-bladed plasma sword. He looked at the bodies of his elite guards, boiled, trapped, and dropped. "You, Orin?" snarled Jude, spittle flying from his fanged mouth. "You are not a soldier. You are a rat. You fight like an insect in the walls." "I fight like a human," Jude said, his voice cold. His muscles were trembling. The adrenaline was crashing, and fatigue was setting in. He was bleeding, exhausted, and vastly outmatched in a one-on-one fight. "I will mount your skull on my throne," Orin roared, charging forward with terrifying speed, the plasma sword humming a deadly song. Jude didn't run. He stood his ground. He waited until Orin was exactly 3 feet away, raising the blade for a decapitating strike. Jude dropped to his knees. The plasma blade sheared the air exactly where his neck had been. The heat was so intense it blistered Jude's scalp. Using Orin's own massive forward momentum against him, Jude thrust his combat knife upward, driving it not into the armor, but directly into the unarmored, exposed joint of Orin's armpit. The steel blade sank to the hilt, severing the brachial artery. Orin roared in agony, dropping the plasma sword. The Lord Commander stumbled backward, clutching his armpit as dark violet blood sprayed across the walls. He looked at Jude in disbelief. "You, a pathetic ape," Orin choked, sinking to his knees as his blood pressure plummeted. Jude stood up slowly. He picked up the dropped plasma sword. The weapon hummed in his hands, casting a harsh blue light over his battered face. "The joke's on you, Orin," Jude said quietly. With one swift, brutal motion, Jude swung the blade. Orin's head hit the floor with a heavy thud. Silence reclaimed the catacombs. Jude dropped the blade. He leaned against the wall, sliding down to a sitting position, gasping for air. The pain in his shoulder was roaring back to life, and the exhaustion in his bones was absolute. A moment later, Empress Varelia emerged from the shadows. She walked slowly past the boiling bodies, the locked armor, and finally stopped at the decapitated corpse of her greatest political rival. She looked down at Jude Caldwell, the squishy, fragile ape, the walking punchline of the galaxy. He was covered in sweat, grease, and the blood of her enemies. He looked up at her, offering a tired, lopsided grin. "Palace is secure, Your Radiance," Jude coughed. "I'm going to need a raise." Varelia slowly sank to her knees, staining her pristine royal gown in the grime of the catacombs. She reached out, placing a trembling hand on Jude's uninjured shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of a monarch to a servant. It was the gesture of someone who had just witnessed a miracle. "You are not a punchline," the Empress whispered into the dark. "You are a god of war." The ascent from the geothermal catacombs was a grueling, bloody crawl. Jude's shoulder throbbed with a sickening rhythm, and Empress Varelia, despite her towering stature and regal bearing, leaned heavily against him, her iridescent skin smudged with soot and gore. When they finally breached the heavy Durac steel doors of the West Wing security bunker, they found the surviving remnants of the Royal Guard in absolute disarray. Panic evaporated the moment Varelia stepped into the command center. Covered in the blood of her enemies, supported by the human the galaxy had mocked, she was a terrifying vision of absolute survival. "Lock down the orbital defense grid," Varelia commanded. Her melodic voice hardened into a cold, diamond-edged bark. "Lord Commander Orin is dead. He orchestrated this treason. Anyone who hesitates in following my orders will share his fate in the magma shafts." As the Corvathi officers recovered, Jude slid against the wall while a medical droid injected coagulant foam into his wounded shoulder, stopping the bleeding despite the searing pain. "Your Radiance," a communications officer said nervously. "We've analyzed the neuropulse generator. It's neither Solari nor Corvathi technology." Jude immediately ordered the schematic displayed. The glowing blueprint appeared before him, and his expression hardened. The power relays, blocky housing, and serial markings were unmistakable. It wasn't just human technology. It was proprietary. "That's a modified G4S interstellar sonic crowd suppression rig," Jude said, his voice a low, dangerous gravel. G4S was one of the largest private military corporations on Earth. A ruthless conglomerate that had secured half the off-world mining contracts in the Outer Rim. Varelia turned to him, her golden eyes narrowing. "A human weapon? You said Orin was behind this." "Orin was the muscle, but he didn't have the brains or the clearance to smuggle human tech past your planetary shields." Jude realized the pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking into place. Orin hired human contractors, privateers. He promised them something massive in exchange for the tech and the tactical planning. Before Varelia could respond, the bunker's proximity alarms wailed. "Unidentified dropship breaching the upper atmosphere," an officer shouted. "It is bypassing our automated defense grid. They have our authorization codes." "Put the visual on the main screen," Jude ordered. The hololith flickered, displaying a sleek, matte black stealth transport burning through the pristine sky. There were no Corvathi insignias, only a stark white crest depicting a sword passing through a skull, the emblem of the Wraith Company, a rogue PMC unit composed of ex-Earth Coalition special operatives. The ship didn't land in the hangar. It bypassed the docking bays entirely, hovering directly outside the reinforced plasteel windows of the West Wing. The side doors blew open, and grappling cables slammed into the palace architecture. Jude's calm earpiece crackled to life, overriding the secure Corvathi frequency. "Well, I'll be damned. The little ape didn't die." Jude's heart stopped. He knew that voice. He had heard it barking orders in the trenches of the Orion Wars. He had heard it over 100 beers back in Chicago. "Jack," Jude whispered. Jack Reynolds, Jude's former commanding officer, the man who had taught him everything he knew about survival, urban warfare, and kinetic violence. Jack had vanished 2 years ago, taking a highly lucrative, highly classified contract in the deep black. "I told Orin not to play with his food," Jack's voice echoed in the command center, dripping with cynical amusement. "I told him to shoot the Empress and take the throne, but he had to make a show of it." Had to hire those Solari freaks. Now I have to come down there and clean up his mess. Nothing personal, Jude. Oren promised us the Premine dilithium mining rights. The Empress has to die. Jack, don't do this, Jude said, gripping his 9mm pistol. You're walking into a slaughterhouse. Kid, you're one wounded grunt in a room full of oversized lizards. I've got 12 Tier 1 operators equipped with bleeding-edge kinetic gear. Tell the alien queen to say her prayers. The comms cut out. Explosives rocked the bunker. The reinforced doors bowed inward, groaning under the immense pressure of breaching charges. Varelia looked at Jude, realizing the horrifying truth. The Corvathi guards were still uncoordinated, their energy weapons practically useless against heavily armored human operatives employing kinetic shielding and flash tactics. If the Empress had learned anything tonight, it was that humanity's capacity for violence was unmatched. And now the violence was coming for her. Jude, Varelia said quietly, stepping behind him. Can you stop your own kind? Jude checked the magazine of his pistol. 15 rounds. He grabbed a heavy Corvathi fragmentation grenade from a fallen guard's belt. The exhaustion that had been dragging him down vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating void. This wasn't a game of galactic politics anymore. This was a street fight. They're not my kind, Jude replied, chambering around. They're just targets. The heavy Durac doors of the bunker blew inward with a deafening shock wave, filling the command center with thick, white, acrid smoke. The alien guards immediately opened fire, sending streaks of blue plasma blindly into the breach. It was exactly what the Wraith Company operators expected. Humans had spent centuries perfecting room-clearing tactics. Before the smoke even cleared, 3 stun grenades bounced into the room. Bang! 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 The deafening concussion and blinding light dropped the remaining Corvathi guards instantly. Their delicate, highly sensitive eyes and ears were completely overloaded. They collapsed, clutching their heads in agony. Through the smoke stepped 12 figures clad in heavy composite tactical armor, their faces hidden behind matte black visors. They moved with terrifying synchronized precision. Assault rifles raised, sweeping their sectors. In the center of the formation was Jack Reynolds, holding a high-caliber designated marksman rifle. Clear the room. Find the Empress, Jack barked. But Jude wasn't in the room. While the Corvathi had stood their ground to shoot at the door, Jude had immediately vaulted over the central hololithic table and shimmied up a maintenance pillar into the shadowed vaulted ceiling of the bunker. He knew how Jack trained his men. They looked for threats at eye level. They looked for the massive, towering aliens. They didn't look up. Jude waited until the rear guard stepped into the room. He pulled the pin on the Corvathi fragmentation grenade, held the spoon for 2 excruciating seconds, and dropped it right into the center of their diamond formation. Grenade! One operator screamed, but it was too late. The alien explosive detonated with a concussive blast of sheer kinetic force, blowing 3 operators off their feet and shattering their armor. The formation shattered. Jude dropped from the ceiling like a stone, landing directly on the shoulders of an operator. He didn't bother shooting the heavy armor. He drove his combat knife straight down into the unarmored gap at the base of the mercenary's neck, using the man's own falling momentum to rip the blade free. Contact above us, Jack yelled, snapping his rifle up. But Jude was already a blur of motion. This was the dark, ugly reality of human-on-human close-quarters combat. A brutal dance of angles, leverage, and lethal efficiency that left the observing Empress entirely paralyzed with awe and horror. The Corvathi fought with grand, sweeping strikes, relying on strength. Jude fought like a cornered wolverine. He grabbed the falling operator's assault rifle, spinning and firing a sustained, deafening burst of 5.56mm rounds into the legs of 2 approaching mercenaries. As they dropped, screaming, Jude discarded the empty rifle, drew his 9mm and sprinted, sliding across the slick, blood-stained floor. He fired 3 precise shots, 2 into the visor of a mercenary attempting to flank the Empress and 1 into the exposed underarm of another. Suppressing fire, Jack roared, furious. His remaining men unleashed a torrent of bullets, shredding the command consoles and turning the room into a chaotic blender of flying sparks and ricochets. Jude dove behind a massive titanium databank. Bullets chewed the metal inches from his head. He was outgunned, outnumbered, and his shoulder was screaming in agony. He had 4 men left, including Jack. "You're getting slow, Jude," Jack taunted, slowly advancing, his men moving to flank the databank. "You always were too sentimental. Die for a paycheck. Sure, but dying for an alien who treated you like a pet, that's just pathetic." Jude took a deep breath, letting the chaotic noise of the room wash over him. He looked at the massive power conduit running along the floor, feeding the orbital defense grid's mainframe directly behind Jack. "I'm not dying for her, Jack," Jude yelled back, his voice echoing over the gunfire. "I'm surviving for my daughter." Jude rolled out from behind the cover, but he didn't aim at Jack. He aimed at the glowing, high-voltage plasma conduit snaking across the floor. He fired his last 3 rounds directly into the containment shielding. The conduit ruptured. A massive, blinding arc of raw electrical plasma lashed out like a whip, seeking the path of least resistance. The Wraith operators, heavily clad in metallic and composite gear, acted as perfect lightning rods. 3 operators convulsed violently as thousands of volts of raw alien energy surged through their suits, cooking them instantly before the palace circuit breakers slammed shut, plunging the room into emergency red lighting. Only Jack remained. He had jumped backward, avoiding the arc, but the blast had knocked his rifle from his hands. Jude stood up, dropping his empty pistol. He drew his bloody combat knife. Jack laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. He drew a massive tactical machete from his hip. "Just you and me, kid. Like the old days." Jack lunged. He was bigger, stronger, and completely uninjured. He swung the machete in a brutal, decapitating arc. Jude ducked, feeling the wind of the blade ruffle his hair. Jack followed up with a vicious knee to Jude's ribs, sending the younger man crashing into a terminal. Jude gasped, tasting blood. Jack stood over him, raising the machete for the killing blow. "Nothing personal, Jude." As the blade came down, Jude didn't block. He twisted his body, letting the heavy machete bite deep into the titanium console right next to his head. The blade stuck for a microsecond. It was all Jude needed. He drove his combat knife upward with every ounce of remaining strength, burying the high-carbon steel directly under Jack's ribs, piercing the diaphragm and striking the heart. Jack gasped. His eyes went wide, staring down at his former student. The machete slipped from his fingers. "Check your corners, old man," Jude whispered, twisting the blade. Jack collapsed backward, dead before he hit the ground. The silence in the command center was absolute, save for the hum of the emergency lights and Jude's ragged, bloody breathing. He pulled his knife free, wiped it on his ruined trousers, and turned to face the Empress. Varelia stepped out from her secure alcove. She looked at the devastation. Elite alien guards, rogue human operatives, and shattered technology littered the floor. And standing in the center of the carnage was her chosen vanguard. The galaxy had called humanity a joke, a fragile, squishy race of apes completely out of their depth in a universe of apex predators. But as Varelia looked at Jude Caldwell, she finally understood the terrifying truth about Earth. Humans weren't apex predators because they had the thickest scales or the sharpest claws. They were apex predators because they possessed an endless, bottomless capacity to adapt, to endure, and to unleash absolute hell when backed into a corner. "The threat is neutralized, your radiance," Jude said, his voice entirely devoid of adrenaline, leaving only a bone-deep exhaustion. Varelia approached him. She didn't look down at him. For the first time, she lowered her head, bringing her golden eyes level with his. "The galaxy is blind, Jude Caldwell," Varelia said softly, her voice echoing in the ruined hall. "They mocked your people. They mocked me for choosing you. Tomorrow I will broadcast this footage to every corner of the Empire. Let them see what an ape of Earth can do." She paused, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips. "I believe your contract requires renegotiation, And I believe the Corvathi Empire requires a new Lord Commander. Jude managed a tired, lopsided smirk. I'll take the job, but I get weekends off to call my kid. Agreed, the Empress said. From that day forward, no one in the galaxy ever laughed at a human again. If you enjoyed the story of how a human bodyguard turned a galactic joke into an empire's ultimate salvation, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans, and let the algorithm know humanity never surrenders. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more epic HFY tales and thrilling space dramas delivered right to your feed. Stay safe out there, and remember, never underestimate an Earthling.